In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the steering knuckle on this Ram 1500. Let's get into it. Using a 22mm socket, we're going to take the lug nuts off. Remove the wheel. We're going to take the caliper bolts off with the bracket. Use a 21mm socket. Take these two bolts out. Grab the caliper, just slide it off the rotor, and we're just going to use a hanger and hang it out of the way. And just pull the rotor off. If it's stuck on, you want to take a hammer and just give it a tap in those locations. Slide that off. Using a trim tool, disconnect this speed sensor. There's a connector on the back here. Just pop that out. See where the connector is. There's a little lock tab here. Just want to slide that up. You can use a pick or even the trim tool. Just try to slide that up. And try to push it up. There we go. Then you push down on the tab, disconnect it. Just pop the retainers out. Right here on the wire. Slide that out of the way. Using a 36mm socket, I'll take this nut off. You're going to loosen this nut up. You can use a 21mm wrench and a 10mm wrench to hold the stud from spinning if you need to, or a 21mm socket. Loosen that up. We're going to leave a couple threads on there, right there. Now we're going to separate the ball joint from the knuckle. There is different front end tools you can use to try to press this out if you have them. If not, just use a hammer. Just give it a tap. That should just pop up like that. Using a pry bar, just pry this down. You can take the nut off. Slide that up, slide that out of the way. Just give the axle a light tap. Using a 21mm socket, take this nut off for the tie rod. You can use a removal tool or just tap it with a hammer. Pop that off, slide that out of the way. Using a 24mm socket, take this nut off. I'm just going to leave it on a couple threads. That's good. And you can use a removal tool, front end removal tool, or just take a hammer, give it a tap. There it goes, it's separated. Take that off. Slide the shaft out as you slide the ball joint out. And it slides right off. We're going to take this wire off. Just use a trim tool, get underneath it. Just pop the retainer out. Just going to use a punch and just punch it through. There we go. Pop that off. We need to take out the wheel bearing bolts. Use a 21mm socket. those out. grab the knuckle and slide it off. If it's stuck on there, you may have to hammer out the wheel bearing, and in doing so, you may ruin the wheel bearing. You might have to replace it, so keep that in mind. Take the new knuckle, slide it the same way over the wheel bearing. There's a shield on here as well. Get that lined up. Get the bolts started. Snug those down. To torque this, I am going to use a long bolt and a pry bar. And you can torque these bolts to 134 foot-pounds. Just be careful. Go. Take the wire with the retainer and just slide that in position. I'll slide this in place. Get the lower ball joint and the axle in at the same time. And take the new lower ball joint nut. Get that started underneath. Once that's started, you can release the knuckle. All right, I'm gonna take the outer tie rod in, slide that in place, get the nut started. Line up the upper control arm, slide the ball joint through, and take the nut, get that started. Now I'm just using a pull jack. Just get the knuckle into position, just put a little bit of pressure on it. We'll tighten that nut. We're going to torque this to 38 foot-pounds. And then if you have a torque angle meter, you want to use that and go an additional 90 degrees. If you don't have one, do the best you can. I can lower the pull jack using a pry bar. Just pry down on the tie rod so that the stud is tight. Then we're going to tighten this up. Get that snug. I'll torque this to 29 foot-pounds. And then an additional 90 degrees. You can use a torque angle meter if you have one. That's 90. Take a pry bar and just pry the upper control arm down. Snug this nut up. Torque this to 26 foot-pounds. And then you want to go an additional 180 degrees. You can use a torque angle meter. If you don't have one, do the best you can. Put the axle nut on. And tighten that down. Using a pry bar, slide it between the studs, and making sure it's touching the ground. We're going to torque this nut to 185 foot-pounds. That's good. Put the rotor on. I'm just going to use a lug nut so the rotor does not fall off, just temporarily. Take the caliper off the hanger. Slide the caliper over the rotor. Get the caliper bolts started. Torque these bolts to 130 foot-pounds. Take the ABS wheel speed sensor wire, push that grommet in there, another retainer, push that in, find the connector, connect the connector, lock it down, and then push down on the lock. Line this up, push that in place. Take the lug nut off. Put the wheel on. Put the lug nuts on. Snug those down. Now we're going to torque these in a cross pattern to 130 foot-pounds to tighten the wheel down evenly. And just go around again, double check.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.